You're in here twice, by the way, Emma. I don't know if you knew that. For some reason. So hi to everybody. It's been a little while since I've seen your faces, or seen your names, really, to be more precise. I am Mackenzie, and I am Artech's CCO. And with me today is Federico Feliziani, who is our CTO and resident security expert. Welcome, Federico.
Hello, everyone.
So what we decided that we wanted to do today with you is a cybersecurity masterclass. I'm just going to share my screen so you can see what's happening here. So as usual, what's really important with ArtEvolve is that we give you something that you can come away with, right? That you can actually take and implement into your organization the minute that you step out of the virtual door of this webinar. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over a number of things. You know, what are the actual art world consequences for having weak cybersecurity? We're going to look at some of the top 10 terms that you might need to know when you're learning about cybersecurity. And then we're going to go into 5 areas where you can make a change right now, you can make an adjustment in order to improve your cybersecurity of your organization. So please feel free to ask questions. You're welcome to pop into the chat as we go. But I think for this session, we're probably going to aim for as well doing Q&A at the end. So you can also, pop in a question in the Q&A section, and we'll make sure that we cover all of those once we get through the kind of masterclass material. So let's get rolling here. So first, Federico, will you tell everybody a little bit about, why security? Why are we bringing you on to talk about security?
Well, that's actually a very good question. Security is something that nowadays impacts every single aspect of a business and of our, personal lives, not just from a privacy point of view, which is linked inherently with security, but also from many different aspects, starting with financial security, so avoiding harm coming from a malicious actor accessing your finances, or even something more tangible like theft or a disgruntled ex-employee, or things of that genre, basically.
Yeah. I agree. Security definitely now cybersecurity reaches into every corner of our lives, professional and personal, I think, at this point. And so why you personally? Tell me a little bit about your background.
So, well, I have been a privacy and security advocate for quite a long time. I have 17 years of experience in IT in general, but I also was a senior security analyst for my previous company. I was part of the cybersecurity team. Previous to that, I worked in the cybersecurity team for one of the largest European banks as a developer. So security has been an important part of my IT career, basically. It's something I'm personally also passionate about.
Definitely. Well, we're excited to have you sharing all this with us today. So as I mentioned, the first thing that we're going to kind of go into is, why does the art world care about cybersecurity, right? What are specific things that can actually happen? So I think when we start talking about cybersecurity in most contexts, a lot of kind of technical jargon will come at you immediately, and that can make your eyes glaze over, right? Because it's like, what's going on? I don't understand any of this. Why is this important to me? So we've decided to first start with, why is it important to you? And then we'll go into the jargon and explain what kind of the most important bits are. So I think the thing that everyone thinks of first when they think about kind of the consequences of weak cybersecurity in the art world is theft, right? The art getting stolen, or valuable high value goods getting stolen. And so some of the things that can cause that to happen is if data about location and value are released, right? Those are particular key items, so that the thieves can decide what the target is going to be and where it's located so they can go get it. So those are really important pieces of information to keep safe, and we'll continue to talk about that as we go forwards. But some of the ones that maybe are not as clear are things like reputational damage. So do you want to talk about that one a little bit, Fede?
Absolutely. So reputational damage is damage that comes out of consequences of a potential hack. So if a company gets hacked, of course, that is an information that rarely remains private. There's many examples of very influential organizations in the world that have been hacked with dire consequences for their reputation. So it's something that a company that is trying to establish themselves in the market, or they are very well established in the market, should aim to avoid as much as possible to continue doing business smoothly with existing customers and new customers in particular, because you don't want to be that company that suffered that massive hack, if you know what I mean.
Definitely. And, you know, art institutions have a lot of important data available to them that they store: client data, artist data, right? Private information, even about artists that if went out could harm both, let's say, the gallery and the artist.
Absolutely.
Right? So I think there's a lot of sensitive data that's dealt with in the art world beyond location and value, right? Which can lead
Absolutely.
to theft.
And it's interesting to think about the fact that some data on its own might not be considered that sensitive, but when joined together with other pieces of information, it can be extremely valuable. So that's why it's important that cybersecurity is strict and well working on all aspects of the company, not just on, say, location or value of an artwork.
Right. So for example, a client's address doesn't mean very much, but if it's paired with all of the artworks that you've sold to them in the entire time they've been your client, that could become a problem.
Exactly.
Right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So then we also look at things like monetary loss. So this is when we're talking about this, we mean both, loss in revenue due to reputational damage or something along those lines, but also direct monetary loss by the institution or money of the client or the artist or other parties. So
absolutely. And not just that, also other indirect forms of monetary loss could be fines. The European Union fairly recently has released the GDPR directives, which force companies to be much more strict about their cybersecurity for personal private data. So that's that could cause massive fines, which of course are monetary in form.
Yeah, and I think sometimes, for example, we'll talk about a number of things, later, of ways that you can kind of protect information, right? And what you can do now to make your cybersecurity stronger. But I think one simple thing, just a simple example is, do you use the same password to be able to, view the financial information of the company as you use to get into your email?
Absolutely.
And if you do, and your email password is hacked, then your bank password is hacked.
Yeah.
Right?
It's very important to be always aware of the risks that someone might be facing when, opening a new account or creating a new password. So it's something that unfortunately requires constant attention. It's not something that you can set and forget.
Right, exactly. Then we have issues with fraud, with both taking and adding information into your database or into your softwares. So fraud in terms of taking information, what type of information could they take, Fede?
Well, value information for art pieces. So many insurance frauds have happened because of incorrect value information for an insured object. In this case would be an art piece, but also adding information to a database. If a malicious actor has access to a database, they can't just remove data, they can also add data and make it look like it belongs there, therefore putting the company in a difficult situation where they can't disprove that that data is not theirs.
Yeah, definitely. So it's not just about being able to remove information or take information from the system, but also adding in information that benefits the hacker.
Exactly.
So, yeah. And then loss of control. So by this, we mean loss of organizational control. You know, something that happens is sometimes you will just be locked out of the system and you can't do any work. Right?
Or even just the time that it takes to restore a backup due to a to an issue with some hacking. It is precious time that has a direct monetary impact on the ability of the company to produce or even just sell or do whatever the company does.
Yeah, definitely. So I think we'll kind of dig into these more as we go forwards, but why don't we dive into the top 10 terms for cybersecurity. So obviously there are many more than 10 terms when we
Absolutely.
talk about cybersecurity, but these are the ones that we've chosen that you will find come up a lot when you're sort of reading cybersecurity intro information, but are never explained or are very rarely explained. And then you have to go look them up and then you have to go, right? So you'll have access to this presentation afterwards. And so this will definitely be a resource hopefully you can use going forwards. And you're welcome to also share it within your organization so that everyone kind of gets this cybersecurity 101 of the top terms.
Absolutely.
Okay, so what's this? What are we looking at?
So this is an example that many use in the cybersecurity world to explain the difference between risk, harm, and threat, which are three words that come up very often, and often people mix them up really just because they can feel similar, but actually in the cybersecurity world they have a very well defined definitions. So in this case we have a resource which would be our city, and we have our infrastructure which would be our dam, and the threat would be a crack on this dam which threatens to cause harm, which would be a loss of productivity or a monetary loss. And the risk of this happening is the probability of the threat becoming a viable harm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So harm is if all of the water from the dam came down, right? And down to the city. Okay.
Correct.
And so that would cause a large amount of harm to that city. And so then the threat is that crack. And then the risk question is how likely is the crack to actually break the dam?
Exactly. And there are many methodologies to calculate risk. And you can talk to your cybersecurity expert about specifics, but most of them, these are based on probability and on assessing the likelihood of a threat and the extent of the harm that might come out of that threat.
Yes, definitely.
Of course, to solve a threat, you have countermeasures, which in this lovely metaphor would be an engineering team fixing the dam. We will see that there are non-profit organizations around the world that are focused on finding countermeasures to both actual hacks and to mispractices in the cybersecurity world. In particular, and I think if you go to the next slide, one of our terms was OWASP. OWASP is the name of this organization, non-profit, that publishes periodically a top 10 of the most common cybersecurity mishaps, if you will. And it's rather technical, but if you show the top 10 list to a IT team personnel, they will definitely be able to pinpoint what to look at and what's the next step to, get them solved.
Yeah, and this is sort of like an industry standard, right?
Absolutely.
That you should be doing to improve security. So it's a good starting point. So just jumping back here, right? In terms of threats, so what if there is no crack there yet?
Well, the thing about cybersecurity, unfortunately, is that you'd have to prove that there is no crack. It's really, really hard to do that. And most importantly, it's something that is constantly put into question because hackers will constantly try and find cracks to slip through.
Right.
So it's something that is constantly evolving, and it's something that needs to be constantly looked at. And there's an entire field of IT that is dedicated to this specifically. So
yeah, so it's something you always kind of have to continue to evolve within your organization too.
absolutely.
Okay, so what about authentication versus authorization? These two sound very similar to me.
Yes. So the moment you start looking into more cybersecurity, more secure computing sort of things, you will very quickly come across these two terms. Most people will use one or the other almost interchangeably, although in the technical world they are very different. Usually, what I say to differentiate the two is authentication is who are you, and authorization is and what do you want to do now. So that is the difference. Authentication is identifying yourself with the system, whereas authorization is defining the set of operations that you can perform on that system.
Yeah, I think you could even simplify it further, right? Who are you and what do you want?
Basically, yes.
Right. I think it's easy to really remember it that way. So who are you is, are you a person who should be allowed into
Yeah.
this
Are you
virtual
who you
space?
say you are?
Are you who you say you are? Yeah. And then what do you want is, what are you actually allowed to do in that
Exactly.
virtual space?
And most often authentication falls on the person or entity making the request, whereas authorization is mostly it falls on the service being given, because of course your level of authorization depends on the service that you're accessing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Okay. All right. Encryption. I think we hear this word all the time when thinking about security, right? Encryption. So what does it mean exactly?
So encryption is a very broad topic. It's something that has been pivotal to keeping information private. You will all remember the Enigma machine during World War II. That was an encrypting machine. It was ciphering text, clear text, as we call it, or plain text, into ciphertext. So scrambled letters and numbers and symbols, or in computer case, bytes, that cannot be read without a specific key. There are many ways of performing encryption operations. Again, there's a whole field of maths behind this. The most commonly used is public-private key authentication. I will not go into detail because it's extremely technical, but it basically allows people to encrypt a piece of text or a file or some document, and have only the specific recipients of that document to decrypt it and be able to read it.
Okay.
An alternative use of this technology is also to cryptographically sign, which is something that probably you will have heard, cryptographically sign a document so that when that document reaches the intended recipient, you can then prove that it hasn't been altered in any way on the way to that person. This is something that we use every day. If you go to your bank's website, or if you go to our website, you will find that it's got a little lock at the top of the web page. That indicates that the information transmitted between the server and your computer is encrypted, so only you can read it.
Okay. Yeah, that is a good little tip to look for, right? When you're using websites, is the little lock.
Little green lock at the top, yes.
Definitely. Okay, so we have two more terms, and then we're going to dive into talking about what you can do for today, right? If you wanted, for improving your cybersecurity in your institution. So, two-factor authentication. So this is often shortened to 2FA, right? And so you'll see it even in like official articles being listed as 2FA, and you're like, what is that? So
yeah,
what is it?
So 2FA sometimes is also referred to as MFA, multi-factor authentication, but it's the same thing. 2FA basically is a method of authenticating yourself. So showing who you are, proving who you are by utilizing something that you know, which may be your username and password, and something that you have, which may be your device or access to a specific email account or some biometric object like your fingerprint or your iris scan or something like that. These are technologies, of course, that are always improving and always getting better. And wherever possible, you should always enable 2FA because it makes it orders of magnitude more complex for a hacker to access the system, because they would have to have something that is physically in your possession, like, for example, your phone.
Yeah. So we're not going to teach you how to do 2FA with your iris today, but no. It is something that, definitely exists. And if anyone has one of the newer Macs, for example, or even, just an iPhone, right? You do have the ability to turn on the something you have, right? Which is your fingerprint or your face.
Face ID. So, yeah. Some Samsung devices had iris scan. That's why I was mentioning it, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it just sounds very futuristic, but
it does.
So what about the cloud? We're going to be mentioning the cloud a lot. Yes. So let's just define it for everybody.
So the cloud is basically, it's the next step after the internet, if you will. The internet, as we all know, it's the network that connects every corner of the world, and the cloud is basically doing computational tasks on the internet. So basically offloading computational tasks to a third party without having to manage the hardware, which is what ultimately everything runs on, without having to manage it yourself. So that way you can iterate and develop quickly and grow fast for many customers in a very efficient way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And it's often distributed across multiple locations, right? So
absolutely.
Rather than having all of your information in one physical place, it distributes it potentially across multiple.
Yes, this is done for both performance, because that way you can be physically close to a person and send them the data that they want on a shorter distance, but also for resilience and for replication. So if, for example, there was a power outage in a data center, the rest of the data and the rest of the network would not be affected because there are multiple copies of the same data on multiple data centers.
Well, and I think that's something important to consider when we're looking at security, is that when we looked at kind of art world specific things, right, we talked a lot about things that were intentional, but in fact, there are a lot of security concerns that are not intentional at all, right?
Absolutely.
It could be power outages, storms, floods, COVID, right? So absolutely. During COVID, a lot of buildings were left empty for weeks on weeks, right? And stuff with places were broken into. And things
there's an entire section of cybersecurity dedicated to so-called disaster recovery, which is exactly what it sounds like. So in case of a disaster being a regular power outage or a flood or nuclear war, you can recover to a well-known state. It's called.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so that's something that, for example, we at ArtEvolve have put into place more recently, right? Is that we have one country where we keep most of our data, and then we have another one as a backup.
Correct.
So move it, right, between those locations if there were to be, some sort of massive failure.
Absolutely. We can redirect traffic on our websites and our services to a different location so that we're always available.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's something to consider when you're kind of thinking about whether you should be using the cloud or your local hardware.
Absolutely.
Something important to consider. Okay. So let's talk about 5 things that you can do right now. So we're going to start with how to send sensitive data securely. So when we're talking about sensitive data, I think we could give a whole bunch of examples of it, right? So it's client data, artist data, it's the data for the objects, it's the location, it's the condition, it's the value, right? It's all sorts of different things. But I think this first point is always surprising to me. Can you explain that, Enrico?
Yes. So email, for as brilliant of a tool as it is, unfortunately was not designed securely from the ground up. There are ways to secure emails, but they're very, very cumbersome, and they require everyone around the world to be doing the same thing, which is almost impossible. But yes, technically speaking, email is transferred in plain text, so it's not encrypted. It may be transmitted over an encrypted tunnel, but the email itself is not encrypted. Also, there is no control over forwarding emails. There is no control over, modifying the content of an email and still make it look like it's authentic. We deal with it every day. Everyone receives tons of spam every day that looks absolutely authentic, whereas where in fact it really is not. It's just that email was not defined as a secure system. It's unfortunately as simple as that. It's practical and it's very useful, but unfortunately it's not secure. Just to explain what the triangle on the left is, that's called the CIA triad in the cybersecurity world, which is what you need to guarantee that data is secure. So you need confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So email is widely available, so you got that, but it's not confidential. Yeah, it's not confidential, or it cannot guarantee integrity of the data because it wasn't designed to be secure.
Yeah, definitely. And I think something like you were saying when you said it would be very hard to secure it, it's because encryption requires both sides to
Correct.
work, right? Not just one. So you can't send someone something that's encrypted and then be like, open it. Right?
Exactly. We hear often about end-to-end encryption. This is exactly what email should be, but it's not. So emails are not end-to-end encrypted. Therefore, they could be hacked in transit with what's called a man-in-the-middle attack.
Yeah, part of that too is because everyone uses different email providers.
Absolutely.
Right? Different protocols and different ways of doing things. So every single email provider in the world would need to agree to do this.
Unfortunately, it's even worse than that. Every single email client in the world, so your iPhone, your Mac, every single one of them should be set up all the same way. So it's even more complex because providers can be forced to work in a common way, but unfortunately, it's up to the end user to actually configure things properly.
Yeah. So essentially what we're saying here, right, is that email, great communication tool, not great for secure information or data that should not be shared with, someone on the street, right? If you can't pass over that piece of paper, if you can't print out the email and give it to someone on the street and have it be okay, then you probably shouldn't be sending it via email.
Correct.
Yeah.
And actually, that's a very good comparison. Email initially was thought of a replacement for physical mail. Therefore, it's literally like giving your sensitive information to a courier that you may or may not trust, or may not be banged in the head in transit and the data replaced. So
yeah, definitely. So when we're talking about these things, right, I think one of the other misconceptions that we come across a lot in the industry is that, okay, well then I should attach that data as a PDF.
Yes.
To my email.
So PDFs, again, great tool. It's brilliant for, quickly creating a snapshot of something. But even if you password protect a PDF, unfortunately nowadays, they're not considered secure anymore. There are many ways to hack a password protected PDF and to modify either a password protected or a non-password protected PDF. Despite what it looks like, even though it looks like it can't be edited, unfortunately, there are many ways to change PDFs, and it's getting easier and easier every day for people that really want to do that. And in this case, we're talking about malicious actors for the most part.
Yeah, or sometimes silly people who lose the original document. So I had that happen, and I literally just need to change a typo. And it was so easy in a PDF. I literally just put a little white rectangle and then wrote the word on top, right?
Exactly.
So it's so easy to make changes and you wouldn't know, right? Once I saved it, you would have no clue.
Exactly. And actually, it also requires a certain level of skill to do that. There was some big news some time ago. I don't remember in which country, but basically a government body tried to cover up some text in some PDFs, but they did it the wrong way, and you could just remove the black boxes in front of the text and read what was underneath. Because PDF is not designed to be, again, it wasn't designed to be a secure method of transferring data.
Yeah. So even if you were trying to cover data that shouldn't be seen,
you can just highlight the text underneath, copy and paste it somewhere else. Simple as that.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. So I think, when we think about these kind of methods that even if you log into your email with a password, that doesn't mean that the data is safe, right? And just because you save a PDF and you don't edit the content doesn't mean the content can't be edited or changed or removed.
That is correct. And there's a big distinction here too, that you started mentioning. It's the difference between password protecting something locally and password protecting something either in transit or in the cloud. Just the fact that you've added a password protection to your computer or to your email client doesn't mean that the data that is in there will be protected once it's sent over somewhere else.
Yeah, definitely. So let's talk a little bit about how to send data securely. What do we do then if email's not working? So I think this is a pretty important little phrase here, which is sometimes you have to let go of perceived control to improve security. So let's talk about that. What does that mean?
Well, to put it bluntly, the cloud is only someone else's computer, and you have to trust that someone else, that other company or organization, to deal securely with your data. Of course, this can be codified into a contract that you have with that company, and the perceived letting go of control only guarantees then the third party does security professionally. So unless you're someone that works in cybersecurity, it's really hard to do things the proper way because there are so many different facets that need to be covered. So you have to often rely on third parties to guarantee that some of that work is already done for you. So especially when we're talking about things in the cloud and things at scale, as we say, so on large levels, you have to rely on third parties that are more knowledgeable on that subject matter to be able to do things the proper way.
Right. So, like we were just talking about, sending something via email isn't necessarily secure. But if in that email, there's a link to that data on a third-party platform, right?
Absolutely.
And that data is secured.
Yep. An example could be, for example, Google Drive. Often when you want to share a file on Google Drive, it will, instead of sending the file via email, and Google, owns Gmail, so they would be able to send a file via email. What they do is send a link, because that way you have to authenticate yourself to Google Drive to guarantee that the person accessing that file is the person that they say they are.
So it's authentication and authorization, right?
Correct, because you are defining what operations that person can do on the file, whether they can only view the file, whether they can add comments. So that's the authorization part. And then when that person receives the link, they have to authenticate themselves with Google to be able to access the system.
Right. So
Google is just an example, of course.
You're not getting to decide the authentication, so who gets it, and you're not getting to decide what they can do with it, right?
Sorry, can you repeat the sentence?
Sorry. So when you send a PDF, you're not able to do the authentication or the authorization, right?
No, you can't do
it or what they do with it.
You can't do either, because once the PDF is in their hands, they can resend it over to someone else, or they can modify it, or they can just take a screenshot of a snippet and just send that snippet, and therefore misquoting you or doing things like that. So these are things that can be controlled on a more tightly integrated platform like Google Drive, like ArtEvolve, etc.
Yeah, so that's actually something we really focus on at Articheck, right? Is
Absolutely.
being able to, and that's why we're talking about it today, is because we spend so much time thinking about it. And so one of the things that we think about, right, is obviously because we store a lot of sensitive data like condition and value and location and all sorts of things. So if you were to share that as a PDF, then someone can take that and do whatever they like with it and give it to whoever they like. But if you share
Absolutely.
it via a link in Articheck, then there's both the authentication, which means that the person has to, be who they say they are, and then there's the authorization, which is, are they allowed to edit it or not? Are they allowed to share it onwards or not? Right?
Correct.
Yeah. So I think yeah, it's definitely something to consider in any type of software that you're using.
Absolutely. Not just ArtEvolve.
Yeah. So for the two-factor authentication, so this is another thing that you can kind of set up now, use two-factor authentication. So usernames and passwords can be easily hacked, right?
Absolutely. With especially with powerful computers that we have today, username and passwords can be hacked in a matter of minutes. Usually, the more easily memorable that password is, the easier it is to hack it.
Yeah.
Especially if it's using normal words, because there's something called a dictionary attack that can be performed on a password. So the hacker will have a set of words that they will try one after the other until they find the right ones, which is much faster than just going letter by letter or number by number. So as the example says, things like password one, it's very easy to hack because you have a password. Sorry, you have a word that is commonly used and just a number. So it's recommended that you use symbols, you use long passwords of made up characters. Of course, no one's asking everybody to remember every single password. That's why there's things like password managers, which I highly recommend you use. But most importantly, since any password eventually can be hacked, using two-factor authentication removes that problem, because if you hack a password, then you only get to the screen that says, okay, authorize this login by clicking on your phone or by inserting this other code from your phone or from your email or things like that. So it adds an extra layer of security on top of a level of security that can be as good or as bad as a person is willing to put effort in.
Yeah, and in terms of forming those passwords, I mean, if you aren't quite to the point where you can use a password manager, a really good tip you actually gave me a few years ago, Fede, was to create a random sentence, right?
Absolutely.
Where at the beginning of the random sentence, you put the name of the software you're using. So for example, your sentence is, mint chocolate chip ice cream is amazing, exclamation point, 1, 2, 3, okay? Yep. And then at the beginning of it, you put Google, mint chocolate chip ice cream is amazing, or Dropbox, mint chocolate chip ice cream is amazing. And it's so long and like random, seemingly random, right? And has nothing to do with any of your pets' names or your mother's maiden name or anything like that.
Absolutely.
That it's harder to get into.
Yeah, definitely. And employing little tricks like, for example, replacing the O's with zeros or replacing the space with an underscore also helps tripping up these hacking algorithms that hackers might use.
Yeah, exactly. So something like that can be a good first step. If Definitely. You can't get to it installed entirely, or you can't use, or you're not ready to set up a password keeper with randomized letters, then try something like that. It's a good first step. It's something that you can remember, but it does make your systems more secure.
The most important thing is also to never reuse the same password, because then you are linking together different systems that may have very different data, therefore opening up an attacker to much more information about yourself and potentially use that information to enter into a different system, further systems along the line.
And find more information, right? So for example,
Absolutely.
Someone gained access to your client data and then also your Articheck data and matched them, that would be more valuable to them than Absolutely. Just having work.
Yeah. There are services online, and again, this is more for, you know, the IT team of a company to know, but there are services online like haveibeenpwned.com that tells you if the password that you're using has been hacked.
Yeah,
so
that's definitely
we
a
might
good one
share a
to
link to that later.
Google that. Yeah. Okay, so what about keeping software updated?
Yeah,
Why? It's so annoying. All the pop-ups.
it is. Unfortunately, it's for a good reason. The hacker community is always looking for ways into systems, so into operating system or into websites and things like that. Of course, because they stand to gain from it, because if there's a vulnerability, they can exploit it to gain access. Of course, software companies like, you know, Apple or Google or Microsoft, they work really hard to close as many security bugs or bugs in general that they can find to avoid having these issues. And of course, what they do, the only thing they can do to patch applications or operating systems that have already been installed on a user's machine is to release software updates. And it's really important to be up to date with them, because there are hacks called 0 days. That means that the day that the software version is released, there's already a hack for it. So you have to always be up to date with the latest version, because it might close bugs or security vulnerabilities that you may not be aware of, and may be completely transparent to you. So you will never know that you've been hacked until it's too late.
Yeah. Yeah. So definitely keeping things updated. And there are easy ways to do this, right? You can set it so that your device updates automatically, so you don't have to deal with it, right? Even
Automatic
with
updates overnight. Absolutely.
yeah, I know with the phone, for example, as well, you're able to like set it so it updates when it's charging at night, things like that. So
Absolutely. And also, let's not forget, updates also often mean new features and new things. Like you could get a better camera algorithm that makes your pictures look better. So, you know, there's many reasons why you want to stay up to date, but security is definitely the highest of them.
yeah. So let's talk about hardware best practices.
Mm-hmm.
So this is specifically, you know, for your local devices. And I know, you know, all sorts of institutions now, it's not just your computer at the desk, but it's the phone in your hand, it's the iPad that you're using, it's the tablet, right?
Absolutely.
So what should we be doing here
So
to
especially if you have your two-factor authentication linked to your phone, it's very important that you keep your phone, if not with you at all times, at least with a password protection and a screen timeout, so that then to get access to the phone itself, you need some form of you know, security control. Also, especially for older devices, it's very expensive for manufacturers to maintain the operating system up to the latest security patches, and sometimes there are hardware issues that cannot be fixed just by software. So it's often recommended to replace old devices with newer ones, not just for a performance boost, but also to access more recent versions of operating systems. Again, for security reasons, on top of all of the extra features that you might get. Another important thing in case of damage or loss of hardware is backups. Backups are fundamental. There's in the industry, we like to talk about the 3-2-1 strategy of backups. So for every piece of important data, you want to have 3 different backups on 2 different kinds of media, with at least one in a different physical location. That way, in the worst case scenario, even if your office catches on fire, you have a backup somewhere else that may not be updated at the last minute, but it's still safe and holding your crucial information.
yeah, definitely.
And then sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
Lastly, just decommission devices. It often happens, and for many industries, is actually mandatory to wipe or fully destroy items before after the decommission, to avoid people gaining access to data that may have remained on those devices after use.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, there's a lot of data that gets saved locally, even if you are doing backups to the cloud. And so
Absolutely.
if there's a device you're no longer using, even if it's going to stay in the office, right, but it's just going to go into a drawer somewhere, then you need to make sure that it's wiped.
Correct.
And you're logged out of everything on there, right? Because if someone were to gain access to that device and you're still logged into your email and the company database, and you're gonna have someone who's able to get into
Exactly.
those systems.
Especially for older devices where it's much more likely that there will be a vulnerability because, all the hardware, all their software, more likely for there to be bugs.
Yeah, definitely. And speaking of leaving devices around that are not password protected, why don't we talk about employee education?
Well, absolutely. Security is like a chain. It's as strong as the weakest link. So it's very, very important that everyone in the company is aware of good security practices. And it's very important that these security practices are periodically tested. Another saying that we have in the security industry is trust but verify. So, for example, many large companies will use tools like KnowBe4 that send fake spam emails. And if someone clicks on the link, they get put in a naughty list, if you will, for a refresher training. So it's very important that everyone in the company is up to date with the latest security training, and in general, they are aware of the security posture of the company, especially because the vast majority of hacks, of successful hacks in particular, is done via what's called social engineering, which is literally the hacker talking to someone and convincing them to share a password. Now, of course, you would think I would never give my password to anyone, but if that person calls you and identifies themselves as, say, Virgin Service or your BT phone operator or something, you may be more likely to provide information that to you may sound innocuous, but actually are useful for a hacker to get into somewhere.
Yeah, definitely. So like you were saying, right, you're talking about training and teaching to spotting specific suspicious activity.
Absolutely.
So it's not just how to not click on a spam phishing email, right? But it's also, if an employee receives one, they should make sure to tell their manager, right?
Absolutely.
So
Reporting is very important. We might hijack TFL's motto of saying, see it, say it, sort it. So if you find something that is suspicious, report it to someone in the security team or in the IT team, so that they can either put a patch on a potential vulnerability or do something to protect yourself and the company while doing so.
Yeah. And then we're also looking at reinforcing best practices, right?
Yes.
So like you were saying, password changes, lowest permission level when sharing data,
Yep.
that type of thing.
As with everything, if you don't write it down, you're gonna be bound to forget it. So write a company security policy. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, but have somewhere accessible to the entire company that says what is expected of everyone in the company from a security point of view, so that you can at least try and have a minimum level of security for everyone's password, for example, because that's what you recommend. More often than not, security practices are tied to people's employment. So if you cause a security breach, it could be dangerous for your employment because it's so important for every company.
Yeah, definitely. So you can actually use what's in this presentation as a starting point, right? So
Absolutely.
for example, say two-factor authentication, or you can say, software gets updated on a regular basis. Even just starting there gives sort of it gives an outline for your team to know what's expected of them. And then you can go into sort of more serious and detailed policies as you go forward. Okay, I think we've gotten through all of it. So does anybody have any questions? The chat has been particularly quiet. I'm hoping we're not bowling you over with all sorts of cybersecurity information. Have you any questions on what we've talked about? Have you run into any issues that you're not sure how to deal with? Is
Yes.
there any terms you've heard you don't know what they are? Yes, Beth, we definitely will share the PowerPoint with you. We'll go out with the recording as well, so feel free to share that within your institution.
We understand this is a very, it can be a very sensitive topic, and it can be intimidating at the beginning, but we truly believe it's something that it's very important for everyone to be aware of and to be, well versed in.
And this is something that's pretty important to us. So if you work with ArtEvolve, then, send us an email. We'll have a chat. We'll talk about security. It's something that's definitely on our minds all of the time. So Beth asked, can you restate the 3-2-1 backup procedure?
Absolutely. So the 3-2-1 procedure is to have 3 copies of 3 backups or copies of every important data, 2 of which are on 2 different mediums. So one can be local and one can be in the cloud, or many companies use different kinds of hard drives, so solid state hard drives or non-solid state hard drives or tape records and things like that. And the 1 stands for at least 1 external location. So a location that is outside of the company premises, so that if something were to happen to the company from a physical point of view, that data would be safe.
Okay, so let's say, right, you have, just to give an example, okay, you have your ArtEvolve data, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so your ArtEvolve report would be both on your local iPad and in our cloud.
Yep.
And that's also 2 different mediums. It is local device and it is the cloud. And then you also have
ArtEvolve's backup.
Mm-hmm.
That is in a separate location. Yeah.
Yeah. So it sounds complicated. It sounds more complicated than it is. It's really just the simplest way to think about it is you want to have it locally and you want to have it somewhere else. And that's going to also cover the 2 different mediums.
That's already a very good basis, and much better than, many people already do.
Yeah. And then having your 3rd copy is the extra bonus, right?
Correct. And often companies will have their own internal backups, but generally you can't necessarily rely on those because you don't have direct access. But, that could be considered already valid.
Mm-hmm. That's definitely true. So let's see, Julia asks, typically, what is the best way to send an invoice to a client who would be purchasing an artwork after having contacted us via email?
That's a very good question. So there are many online invoicing platforms. I think Xero does that, that allows you to basically do what ArtEvolve does, sending an email in reply with a link to the invoice on the platform, on the invoicing platform itself. That way you can continue to have that security of having the person having to authenticate themselves before reaching that data.
Yeah, definitely. So, and there's a number of invoicing clients that do that.
Yes, that was just the first that came to mind.
Yeah, no, and there's also where you can keep your financial information too. So it kind of, and they're probably about, it's like even things like QuickBooks and stuff offers that.
Yeah.
So.
And the basic way would simply be to upload the invoice to something like a Google Drive and share a link to that file on the cloud. That would be just the simplest way.
And then Julia says, could the person not make screenshots of the invoice modified afterwards? They could, but the invoice always exists as an original in that 3rd-party system.
Correct.
Right?
That works so as prior art, if you will.
Not be modified. So you can modify a picture of the invoice, but you could never modify the invoice that actually sits at that link.
That's correct. That's a very good question, actually. It's called the analog hole.
Yeah, definitely. Does using VPNs protect us? That is
Another very good
really
question. And yes, they do, but to a certain extent. A VPN is a very good protection with data in transit, but not once the data reaches its destination. You can think of a VPN a little bit like a protective shield around your data while it travels over the
like an
internet.
armored car.
Sorry?
Like an armored car.
Like an armored car, exactly. The problem with VPNs, which especially nowadays where we have many very, very cheap VPNs and especially free ones, is that you then have to trust the VPN provider because they still have access to that data. So be wary of free VPNs or cheap VPNs. Make sure that they are as trustworthy as they claim they are. Because just due to the way technology works, to be able to protect your data, they have to be able to read it.
Yeah. And so in that case, then, do you recommend Tor?
Yes and no. Tor is great for activists and for people that are in countries that limit the freedom of speech of people. But unfortunately, it's a relatively old protocol nowadays, and also it's often considered nefarious. So you won't be able to use Tor, for example, while accessing your bank. And it's not recommended that you do so because the exit nodes, which are the last hop, the last step that your data will go through before reaching its intended purpose, could be open to anyone. One of the way the American government.
For everyone who's listening, a VPN takes you through one location, right, and masks your location one time. Tor masks your location multiple times before coming out the end.
Yeah. Correct. The problem with Tor is that anyone can run a Tor node, so-called. So, for example, a way in which the American government managed to capture people that were using Tor for nefarious purposes was to run their own exit nodes, therefore reading the content of the data traveling through Tor. Oh. So it's not recommended for specific purposes.
So a paid VPN, I think, is probably the best.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And a paid VPN from a reputable vendor. So do your research.
Check out Trustpilot. That's a good place.
Either Trustpilot, there's a website called thatoneprivacysite.com that I highly recommend that has a VPN comparison list.
Oh, thatoneprivacysite.com. Okay, great. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And thank you, Federico, for sharing all of your depths of knowledge. I'm sure this is a little basic for you.
That's all right. I mean, if you want to have other sessions, just let me know. We can talk for hours if we want.
I have no doubt. So if anyone has any questions, follow-up questions, feel free to shoot us an email. We'll make sure you get the recording and the presentation. If you don't have a company policy in place yet, feel free to use the presentation to kind of make a one-pager just as your starting point. We'll get all of that out to you tomorrow. So have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Bye.